America in the 1940s is an incredible decade, right? I was very lucky to teach a course in the American Studies program on America in the 1940s. Let me get a plug in for American Studies for the students. This is a certificate program. It's a fascinating field of study. You take, I think it's 6 courses, or do you know what it is? You probably don't know what it is. So it's like 6 courses on America, pop culture, sociology, all kinds of very interesting things. And one of the courses I teach is America in the 1940s. Okay, so to understand the 1940s, we have to understand the 1938, 1939 first. Because, you know, decades don't like, it's not like the world goes, okay, 1940s, let's start. Things started in 1939 to change for the country. Some were good things. We're starting to come out of the Great Depression, but we are dealing with the aftermath of the Dust Bowl. Who can tell me what the Dust Bowl was? It basically dried up, became a little dust bowl, right? So people from Oklahoma and other places moved to California. There was this great exodus, great hardship on their part. So we're still dealing with the aftermath of that in 1939, moving into 1940. The Spanish Civil War ends, which is a good thing, but Hitler invades Poland. Kind of ignored by a lot of people. Well, it's just Poland. Sorry, Jerry, my husband's Polish on both sides. He goes, the Poles are always caught in the middle, right? Well, they're caught in the middle again. So Hitler invades Poland. We have the 1939 America hosts and New York hosts what? In 1939? The World's Fair, very good. World's Fair opens on a great feeling of euphoria and optimism for the coming decade. When Hitler invades Poland, that kind of deflates because people who were involved with it kind of knew what was going on. Okay, so those are major events. There's a lot going on in pop culture that affects things that you watch and listen to today. The movie Stagecoach is released. Okay. Oklahoma, the musical Oklahoma opens on Broadway. If you've never seen Stagecoach, go out, get it now. It introduces John Wayne. John Wayne was a B-movie actor to that point, but it makes John Wayne a star. Okay. Batman, my favorite comic book hero, is introduced in 1939. And the first World Science Fiction Convention is held in New York City. Imagine that, 1939. Any of you go to Comic-Con, or do you see stories about Comic-Con, right? Professor Dilliard. That came out of 1939. Okay. Lou Gehrig retires, Wizard of Oz is released, the CBS television begins transmitting. So all these changes are taking place in 1939 that are going to lead directly to things that we see in 1940. When we think of the 1940s in America, this is what we think of. What do we see here? How would you characterize this family? Middle-class family. Where do they live? Do they live in the city? Suburbs, right? They're white, right? All representations of families on, television. You didn't see black families on television. You saw white families, right? They have 2 kids. Difference is they're usually depicted as a boy and a girl, the boy being the older and the girl being the younger, because that's the perfect way, right? So it's basically what they would say 2 cars in the garage and 2 kids. Chicken in every pot, right? It's starting to turn into what we would eventually come to see as the 1950s, right? But that starts in the 1940s. This idea of the suburbs is where you want to live, this idea of the perfect nuclear family. Anybody who falls outside of this, tough luck, right? If you don't want to get married, God forbid you're a woman and don't want to get married, right? God forbid you're a woman, you're married, you don't want kids, right? That all falls outside these norms. Okay. What does it mean to be an American in 1940? Well, at this point, the original high tide of immigration has slowed. So we're seeing fewer and fewer immigrants at this point in time. Now we're going to see more people come in when the war starts, right? When we start people trying to get out of Germany, Poland, Paris are going to come over. So the population remains, but when stable, I mean there's not a lot of huge influx into one place where you have to deal with a lot of immigrants or people moving from one part of the country to the other. That ended when the Dust Bowl ended. What they call the ethnic mix remains stable. By that, there's no great influx or movement of one particular ethnicity from one place to another, kind of stabilized out. And a lot of people say that Eastern Europeans, Jews, stop being automatically viewed as quote-unquote alien. That would be in the urban areas, particularly New York, not in the suburbs. Right? Jewish families were a little more accepted, but if you came from Eastern Europe with your grandma in a babushka and your native foods that you're eating, you'd still be viewed with a little bit of suspicion, right? But they're not automatically viewed as alien. There are a lot of things going on. This is when American cities had their sort of last stand in many ways, right? Because of what we said before, because of that suburbanization. People were starting to move out to the suburbs. The great influx comes in the 50s, but it started here. When I say this death of ethnic urban culture, what that means is, as immigrants come to America, they don't necessarily keep their own country's practices. Students, what do we call that when somebody comes and starts? Yes. Assimilation. Very good. Okay, so aliens, right, legal aliens, are coming and being assimilated into American culture. You learned English. You didn't keep your native tongue. My grandfather's parents were from Italy. And when I was a kid and I said to him, can you teach, my sister and I wanted to learn Italian. And he seriously drew himself up and said, what do you want to learn that gutter language for? You're an American. That was the view of people coming here. You left behind your ethnic practices and became American. Okay. Industrial unionization, the rise of the unions, the workers' unions, right? Which we've now seen the death of, unfortunately, in many ways. But we see the rise of the unions. There was a time prior to 1940 where American communism started to take hold. People were interested in what communism had to offer. Does anybody know what there's sort of a tagline for communism? Red Scare, right? But there's something that Americans found very appealing about it, which was from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. That sounds really good, right? Right? We all do what we can and then we all share what we have. Right? In a land where you're starting to see a big spread between those who have and those who have not, communism starts sounding kind of good, at least economic communism. But in the 1940s, we see that that's fading away. There are Red Scares, there are communist hunts as we start to learn more about the communist ideology. And then this shift. This is really important to not just 1940s, but this is important to you now, right? A shift from the industrial economy to the service economy. Industrial economy is building things. What's the service economy? Business majors. What does it sound like? Yeah, but so if you're getting paid to serve others, what are you doing? Those are higher elevated, pushing paid. You could be pushing papers, but something like you want fries with that, that's the service economy, right? Waiting on people, working in stores, doing those lower wage jobs generally. Service economies are usually lower wage jobs. We see that now. There's no really manufacturing in Brooklyn except micro manufacturing now, right? All the big companies are gone. It means the jobs are gone, the well-paying jobs are gone. That starts in the 1940s. We also have what we say the other America at the time, and that's for African Americans. Okay? So that picture I showed you, that stereotypical white, middle-class, suburbanized family, was not the experience for Black Americans. At the start of the 1940s, Brooklyn, New York was the most integrated section of the entire United States of America. Let me repeat that. It was the most integrated section of the United States of America at the start of the 1940s. Black and white people lived together prayed together, worked together. By the end of the 1940s, Brooklyn is the most segregated section of the United States of America for two reasons. First of all, like so many things that happen in New York that turn out not so good, we can blame Robert Moses, right? Oh yeah, I can hear the grumblings already, right? Moses decides he's going to build these apartment buildings sort of on the outside, right? Who does he want living in apartment buildings? Does he want black Americans? He wants white Brooklynites, white New Yorkers. Blacks are not allowed in the buildings. Okay? So what happens is, as the white population begins to move out, we also have something called redlining in the rental and particularly bank loans. They would draw red lines around areas where black people lived. Just one black person on a block made it a black area. And then the banks would charge much higher interest on loans inside that redlined area. What did that mean? That meant it pushed African American Brooklynites in to Bed-Stuy, and it pushed white Brooklynites out into where those apartment buildings were. And it happened within 10 years. Scary, right? Within 10 years. That film I was showing at the beginning, that was Harlem. Black and white kids living together, Jews and Gentiles living together. You saw Italians, you saw Eastern Europeans, you saw white American, you would say American because you can't really guess the ethnicity, right? All lived together in Harlem in the early 40s. That changes too because of redlining. Right? So we have segregation, we have the Jim Crow laws. What are those? Anybody? Nobody from my civil rights course? Jim Crow laws are in the South, considered in the South, although we had some here. They're the laws that keep trying to circumvent equal rights for African Americans. So, Selma, Alabama, right? You would have to, for example, I can't remember if it's Selma, don't quote me on that, but down in some southern parts, you might have to have a literacy test to vote. I know Selma had one. And you would go and you would have to prove that you can read, but they would change the literacy test. If you were black and you came in and you passed it, they go, that's the first part, here's the second part. And they kept going until it got to the point where not even professors could read it. We'd be like, what the hell? I don't get this. And they go, sorry, you can't vote, right? So there are ways of oppressing African Americans by law, because they considered it legal back then, right? So when we talk about these sort of broad ideas about the 1940s, we have to remember that not all of them apply to all Americans during the 1940s. African Americans had a very unique, different experience than white Americans did. One of the things that happened was the birth of the civil rights movement. Right, A. Philip Randolph, if any of you saw any of the films on the anniversary of the March on Washington, right? Martin Luther King didn't come up with the March on Washington. A. Philip Randolph came up with the March on Washington. And it was because he was the head of one of the first unions, which is the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters on the trains. They were being paid nothing. And he said, fine, this is what we're going to do. We're going to strike and we're going to march on Washington. And the government, the railroads caved. Right? Not as much as white people, they were paid. But the March on Washington movement that he started, they didn't have a March on Washington in the 40s because he got concessions for his union. When you look at films of the March on Washington, the less nuanced ones just show Martin Luther King. The ones who are talking about the history, A. Philip Randolph was at the March on Washington, hardly mentioned. Right? But it all started in the 1940s. Then there's World War II. Okay? We've got Edward R. Murrow, Ernie Pyle, John Hersey here. They're the reporters, among many, who went to World War II. It's not like getting embedded today where they give you, protection, you get your nice little flak jacket that says press on it, and they all watch out for you. No, you just went over and slogged through the war, right? So World War II is going on, and we're getting reports back about World War II, right? Now, One thing about World War II was that military, what this says here, military experiences became a common coin. In other words, if you were a man of a certain age, you went to war, unless there was something really, physically wrong with you. Or, like my grandfather, you worked in something that was vital to America. He was a welder. They weren't going to send a master welder over to get shot at. They were going to leave him here to build ships and do things like that. But it meant that just about everybody in the United States at least knew someone in the military, if not had a member or two or three or four of their family over there. Okay? We have out of this, I don't think I have another, no. Okay. We have a couple of other phenomena that have a direct effect on us today. One is the GI Bill. What's the GI Bill? No, but there's one particular part of the GI Bill that's most important to us. Education. Up until that time, none of us would be here without the GI Bill. I can pretty much guarantee that. Unless any of you come from really rich families, right? Down here? No? Okay, so none of us would be here. The GI Bill opened up education to middle and lower class Americans in a way it had never been opened before. GIs coming over were guaranteed an education. So en masse, they got the education, they went to college. And so did their children and their children's children. And your children's children's children. Right? The other thing was the role of women in the United States. Gender is kind of my thing. I'm a feminist scholar. So have you all heard of Rosie the Riveter? Okay, so Rosie the Riveter was emblematic of the women who went to work in the factories when the men were overseas fighting. Great camaraderie. There's a book called Slacks and Calluses. If you've never read it, it's really fun, by these two women who went to work. It was an odd way to be moving through America at the time, because, for example, if you were a woman wearing slacks, wearing pants, you were considered of loose morals. So some women would wear their skirts to work and then change their pants. These other women are like, heck with that, I'm wearing my pants. Right? So ladies, the reason you can wear your blue jeans today is because of Rosie the Riveter. Literally, she broke that stereotype. What's the problem, though, when the men come home from war? Yes. They want their jobs back. They don't want the little woman out working. They're the breadwinners, right? That's all part of that family I showed you. Dad's the breadwinner. What does mom do? Take care of babies, stay at home. Now, you've been working for 3 years in a factory. You've had your own money. You've taken care of the house. You've taken care of the budget. You've made all the purchasing decisions. You don't have to go to your husband and say, may I please have $20 because I need a new dress? How are you going to feel? You going to feel good about that? No. So relations between men and women changed dramatically during World War II. World War II is a pivot point in American identity, just like the Civil War and just like Vietnam. When we went into World War II, we were, coming out of World War I, but we'd been late to World War I, right? Europe held a lot of resentments against the United States. Look at all these people who died. You could have helped us sooner. World War II, we held off until what? Pearl Harbor. Then we went in full bore, man. I mean, there was just, they knew we were there. So we come out of World War II a superpower, right? One of the powers of the United States. We are G.I. Joe and Rosie the Riveter, and we can do anything, which leads directly into the prosperity and the optimism of the 50s, right? A lot of that's faded now, but World War II had a real huge influence on the way America viewed itself and its role in the world, and would play a large part in a lot of the decision-making that went into Vietnam, as a matter of fact. Right? We've never lost a war, although Civil War didn't one side of us lose, but that's okay. We never lost a war, and then we go to Vietnam. All hell breaks loose, right? So, but World War II influences a lot of decisions, military, political, that follow. One of my areas that I teach is in mass culture. By that I mean like popular culture. So I want to just take, what do I have, like 3 or 4 minutes? Okay. So golden age of mass culture, truly American. What you see now is sort of an amalgamation of other different countries' pop culture coming in, which is a good thing. But back then we had things like literary naturalism. You didn't have the highfalutin language. People talked the way they talked. Southern chic writing, African, American, and American fiction become mainstream. We have the beats, we have all kinds of different literary movements flourishing in the 40s that are now part of the canon in the colleges. They're part of the courses you're taking now. American music, we have bop, which becomes rock and roll eventually. Big band, that's what you heard. The film's coming in, at least the first one. Country and Western, right? None of you listen to that. I do, but oh yeah. And rhythm and blues, right? Not which becomes the R&B that we know today, but slightly different. Okay. Late night radio signals, transmitters get bigger, so music spreads throughout the country. They used to call rhythm and blues race music, and they wouldn't play it on the radios until people started picking up New York and Southern black radio stations and went, hey, I like that. Wait, why can't you play that? So they had to change it to rhythm and blues. Right. So that's kind of what I said before, the pivot on which culture comes. We have a sense of place. E.B. White writes an essay called Here is New York. Right. I just showed that picture because we went to see Lucky Guy with Tom Hanks last year. They had quotations from E.B. White's Here is New York. I'm going to skip over this. We have A Streetcar Named Desire. You can't imagine A Streetcar Named Desire being anywhere but New Orleans, right? So we have very specific areas in literature. Again, the Southern chic. Then I'll finish with the movies. As I mentioned, the Western, John Wayne. I know my fellow feminist film critics would be annoyed, but I love John Wayne. And I think that he is mischaracterized, because if you look at his movies, who's the person who always tames him is the woman. He can't hold his own against Maureen O'Hara. Who's going to win in that? Maureen O'Hara, right? So, and then we have also my favorite, Dale Evans. And that's not her here, but Roy Rogers, Dale Evans, that's Bob Hope. But we have the singing cowboys, the singing westerns, right? I have a whole essay I wrote on Dale Evans, feminist icon. And then we have the American movies. Film noir, right? That's prototypical American, but it came about because of the shortages of World War II. Here's something that World War II did. You couldn't get the material to build those big Klieg lights. You see all those Klieg lights out there, like up on Pierpont, right, this week, where they're filming a movie and you need them to film movies. They couldn't get the material. So they had to use different kind of lighting. So all these shadows that you associate with film noir, something like the Maltese Falcon or something like the Big Clock, are all because of wartime shortages. They took some German filmmaking, because Germans were having to do this earlier. If you look at Nosferatu from much earlier, they have all the shadows, right? So they looked at German films and said, hey, they do it with shadows. We can do it with shadows. Thus is born film noir. And finally, it's the golden age of science fiction. The Pulp magazine. Pulp refers to the paper it's on, because they didn't have the fancy schmancy magazine glossy paper because of the war shortages. So it's published on something that feels like newsprint. You have Weird Tales, I, Robot, all these different sci-fi things that are starting to look at the way the world works and lead directly to the golden age of sci-fi in 1950.